Good evening. My name is Leslie Kelly, and on behalf of the Harbor Area Chapter of the Links, welcome to the fourth and final installment of our Link Together Coping in Quarantine series. Tonight, we present Courageous Conversations, Faith and Wellness in the Face of the Pandemic. With this series of webinars, it was our hope to offer an emotional outlet, as well as provide useful information to you, our friends, colleagues, and families on how to meet the challenges of keeping emotionally, physically, and financially stable during an unprecedented global health crisis. But first, some housekeeping. Please note that this session will be video recorded. The webinar will be 90 minutes. You will be allowed to submit questions throughout the webinar by accessing the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screens. For questions for our presenters, please type your questions using the Q&A function. A survey link will be provided to you at the end of our webinar. Please provide your feedback. Please use the hashtags #HAClinks and LinkedIn social media to share your thoughts, takeaways, and comments. "2020 is a year of nearly unrivaled challenges. But little did we know when we planned this series that we would also be confronted with an ongoing battle for social justice and equality by an event that not only the entire nation, world. Sadly, as you all know, the killing of George Floyd was and in fact was the death of an unarmed Black American, which occurred as we watched shuttered in our homes during this pandemic. The deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor, as well as COVID-19, have been a stark reminder of the racial divide that continues in our country. During this time, you'll learn how to manage your well-being, how to soothe your soul, and how to tend to your mental and physical health. Tonight, we bring two spectacular voices, Dr. Gloria Morrow, a psychologist who served as an academician and clinical at Laverne and Cal State Fullerton prior to starting GM Psychological Services in Southern California. She currently serves as Director of Behavioral Health for several clinics in both Northern and Southern California. Because of her own commitment to the faith community, Dr. Gloria has been actively involved in helping faith leaders and mental health professionals to work together to help people of faith with mental health challenges. This work is supported by her very own handbook, SAFE, Spirituality and Faith Empowers. The recipient of numerous awards and commendations, Dr. Gloria is a published author of several books and has been featured in numerous publications, including Jet, Essence, Women's Day, and Psychology Today. Our second speaker, attorney Adrienne Conager Macklin, is a Compton native and graduate of UC Irvine and UC Hastings School of Law. She also possesses a certification in dispute resolution at University. She's practiced for over 30 years and judged by Governor Jerry Brown. She currently serves as General Counsel for the San Diego County Office of Education. In her fourth term as an elected official, Adrienne now sits as the president of the Pomona Unified School District. She has devoted her career to securing and protecting the educational rights of children and has been at the forefront of addressing educational inequalities. She is a frequent speaker on the issue of women's empowerment, mentoring, and spirituality, and is a former president of the Harbor Area Chapters. Once again, we'll begin with a few comments from each of our speakers and then open it up to you, our guests, to take your questions and address the issues that you're concerned with. Remember, you can submit your questions throughout the event by accessing the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screens. So let's first hear Gloria Morrow.
Good evening. It is so wonderful to be back. And I just have to say, this is one of the greatest organizations, and I appreciate your agenda to help women to be whole. And when you help women, then you're going to help everybody. And so thank you so much, Miss Leslie, for that lovely introduction. I'm always happy to be in the room with Attorney Adrian, just a wonderful, fabulous friend of mine. Anyway, so this was wonderful. And then to Dr. Valerie Green Amos, thank you for connecting us, and Natalie for all you do. And just all of you, I appreciate this opportunity. And as Leslie said, as we can all testify, we are in some challenging times, and I like to call those times different. I was here before, and I use that word, different, as opposed to difficult, because I think if we change our language about this time, we'll be able to find some positive stuff happening during the course of the social injustices of the world and this pandemic. So we're going through two pandemics. So I want to ask you to do something with me. I had to share with some women a few weeks ago, and men, and I thought about this. We don't have a way to say how we're feeling. And I want to start out by asking you if you could just think of 3 words to describe how you're feeling. And you know, Wendy Williams has her talk show, and she always says, "How you doing?" All right. So that's the question I'm asking. How you doing? This is a tough time for us. And so let me give you my 3 words. And if you would just put them in the chat room so we'll know that you're with us. 3 words that describe how you're doing. And let me just say, the first emotion that I have really been grappling with is a sense of sadness. You know, I felt sad because here we are in 2020 and we're having to deal with the same issues that we have historically had to deal with. Then I moved from sadness to angry. And I'm telling you, once we get angry, if we don't get too angry, if we get just angry enough to move us and motivate us, it helps us to get to my 3rd word, which is hopeful. I am so hopeful. I see so many positive things happening in the midst of this. In fact, I see some changes already being made. So I'm hopeful. I'm even hopeful about our coronavirus that has infiltrated us. I'm very hopeful. And by the way, I have been able to turn my ashes into joy. I've been able to say, you know what? I needed to have some time off. I needed to pause and reset. So I've been able to do that. So hopefully you will see some of the positive in it. And thank you. I see you all commenting. This is really good. And this is a wonderful step for helping us to be healthy, because a lot of times we walk around with a lot of emotions on the inside. And I know Adrian's going to talk to you about what we become as women. And so you need to dump some stuff, and it's really good to share your truth. And thank you so much for doing that. And we'll try to address some of these a little later. So we are admittedly going through major crises that may be causing all of us to experience different kinds of feelings and emotions. And the first thing, we have a perceived threat to our safety and well-being. The coronavirus in and of itself has really presented that. And I was just hearing from one of your members a loss, and I won't share her loss, but she shared it with us. And it just let us know that we are in the midst of something like we have never experienced before. And it is a perceived threat to our safety and well-being. And when we think about racism in America, We have walked around feeling unsafe at times and threatened in our environments. And so that kind of goes hand in hand with where we all are today. And then sometimes there's the inability to modify or reduce the impact of these stressful events. There's some things we just don't have the resources or the power to do anything about. That causes us to feel more distress. And sometimes, if we're going to be big girls and speak truth, sometimes we have fear, tension, and even confusion about what's going on. You may do well a couple of days, and then when it all settles in, we start feeling that fear and anxiety that is normal during these times. And then sometimes there's this high level of subjective emotional discomfort or pain. And I will tell you, for a whole week, I have been crying on and off every single day. I'm telling you, it has brought some emotions out in me that I thought I was a big girl. I said, I can handle most anything because I sit with people who share some of the worst things that anyone can share with you. I am a container of secrets and people's struggles, and I can handle it pretty well. But I have been weeping both for the bad things that are happening and the hopeful things that are happening. So I've been an emotional wreck. And then sometimes we just feel out of balance as we are going through these stages. And I want to just tell you a really quick story that really you may relate to, especially when we heard George Floyd say he just wanted his mother. I was talking to my grandson and my grandson had done a report, and he's 9, on Harriet Tubman. So he wanted to watch Harriet. And so we sat down with him and watched Harriet. And I was concerned because, it's pretty heavy. And he sat glued to that television. He wanted every moment to be, readily available to him. And when he finished, the television immediately went to the news, and he saw the fiery protests that were going on. And when he saw it this time, people were fighting and looting and doing all kinds of stuff. So he turns to his father and he says, when is this going to be over? And I started tearing up already. I said, oh, Lord, this child, it shouldn't even have to deal with this kind of stuff. But then to watch my son share with his son a truth that was hard to hear. He had to be constantly real with him. So it just made me think, I think we're grieving. I think we're grieving for our children. I think we're grieving for our sons and our grandsons. We're grieving because their innocence sometimes gets stolen because they have to grow up really quickly in a world that we would love for it to be safe and nurturing, and it would be the kind of place that we wouldn't worry where they go. But we are grieving. And I just thought I'd take a minute before I wrap up to give you some of the stages of grief that we all may be going through. And with COVID-19, not only are we dealing with the disease itself, we're dealing with loss. We're dealing with people who are dying. We're dealing with people that we can't even be with while they're dying. And for people who are in the healthcare profession, sometimes they can't even be just doing their job. They can't do their job as a nurse or a doctor alone. They have to become a chaplain and sometimes connect the family with their family members in their final hours. And so we've got a lot of grief and loss. And those stages from Deborah Bronstad are shock and denial, going to pain and guilt, anger and bargaining, depression, reflection and loneliness, the upward turn, reconstruction and working through, and then finally acceptance and hope. And I think if we had a lot of time and we were looking at each other, you could raise your hands at various stages of these stages and say, I'm there, I get it, I understand, because we are. But I'm here to tell you, it's okay. It's normal to feel some of the things that we're feeling. We're going up and down, and it's okay. Don't think you're crazy because this is how you're relating to something that is different and something that we haven't experienced in our lifetime. So let me share with you some of the physical symptoms of distress that you may experience. And if you would just take a moment and lift your hands, we can't see you, but it's okay for you to own your truth. Sleep disturbance, jaw, shoulder, back or neck pain, tension headaches, cramps, heartburn. Sometimes people have constipation and diarrhea, eating disturbances, muscle tension, fatigue, sweaty palms, cold hands or feet, shortness of breath, chest pains, skin problems. And this one we have to be so careful about. It's increased vulnerability to cold, flu, and infections.
Mhm.
Because of COVID-19, we already are compromised in our immune system. And so we got to make sure that we're staying healthy. So these are some of the things when you're dealing with racism and watching the stuff that's going on, it's going to cause you to have some of these distresses. Then psychologically, we can deal with anxiety. And I'm not just talking about being anxious because of the situation. Some of us are already anxious. Some of us are already depressed. So this is going to be a more difficult time for us. There can be irritability, hopelessness, helplessness, impatience, feeling of doom and gloom, and sometimes just feeling nervous. And then interpersonally, we can have symptoms of having increased arguments. You know, we're sequestered at home. And for those who are married, this is a time that could be a lovely time for rediscovering your love and your marriage, but it could be the time that he is getting on my best nerves. Why can't he go somewhere? So sometimes we're going through because of being sequestered together. In fact, I don't want to joke about this because sometimes we're dealing with domestic violence because people are already at risk, and then because they don't have an escape, they can have some other problems. And we're isolating. We've been told to socially distance, but that doesn't mean to be socially isolated. There are ways that we can come together like we're doing tonight. There are many ways to do that, but when you're not doing well, you will find yourself staying in your room and staying quiet. Job instability, conflict with coworkers and employers. I had a client the other day that had road rage just out of the blue. This person was normally calm, but just losing it because we've got so much stress on us. And domestic or workplace violence, and then something that we can do as women, overreact. And then spiritually, sometimes we can feel disconnected from our power source. Some of us are asking the question, and I shared with some folks the other day, it was a legitimate question. Well, if God loves us so much, why are we still dealing with racism in America? Oh my gosh, that was such a provocative question because spiritually, I knew the answer. But when people may not have that spiritual base, that's hard for them to accept. So people are feeling disconnected from their power source and may even have existential angst. And so I want to shift in the last moments to talk about what can happen when we are bombarded by racism. We can have acute racism reactions. How many of you feel fatigued because you are called upon to be the expert as a person of color? And we're also the person that's supposed to make people feel okay who are dealing with their own emotions. So many of my friends of other groups have called me to ask me, you know, how are you doing? And then after they ask me how I'm doing, then they want to ask, well, what do you think about this? Because they want me somehow to make them feel better. So
Mhm.
I'm telling you, we deal with racism related fatigue. This is that psychological and physiological exhaustion that we experience in response to chronic exposure to racism and oppression. We're tired of the microaggressions. We're tired of being followed around in stores. We're tired of watching the police mistreat our young Black men. We are tired of that. And then we have anticipatory racism reaction, where we develop these defense mechanisms because we have been victims or recipients of racial discrimination or racially motivated hostility. And then there can be this race related stress and distress. These are those acute stressors due to encounters with racism and oppression that may manifest physically and psychologically. And then we can be frustrated because we are getting more and more tired of these incidents. And then racism related confusion, which is our search for identity because of these racist exchanges that cause confusion, bewilderment, and psychological and physical fatigue. Sometimes we ask ourselves, am I playing the race card? Am I overreacting? Did I just see what I thought I saw? But the other day, what happened to George Floyd helped us to all know we were seeing what we knew we were seeing. And that couldn't take away what our reality was and what reality is in our country. And then here are the physiological effects of racism: hypertension, cardiovascular reactivity, physiological arousal. And then again, COVID-19 is not good because when you are bombarded with racism, we have increased susceptibility to minor and major illnesses due to a weakened immune system. So the question is racism good for anybody? And the answer is no. So I want you to take a moment, and this will be in your time. Think about some strategies, and if you want to write some in our chat room, you can. What are you doing to cope? Are you using positive coping strategies or negative coping strategies? And I want to start with the negative ones because I want to make sure we understand what they are. If we're drinking and using drugs to cope, now it's okay to have a little wine and have a little cocktail, that's fine. But if you're just finding yourself drinking more and using prescription drugs more, then you may have a serious problem. And then social isolation. If you're isolating from everybody, you're already told to socially distance yourself, but are you now isolating from your family and your friends? Are you so angry until it's affecting how you're doing? That anger is important. Avoidance, and then self-destructive behaviors. So here's what you should be doing positively: talking about your thoughts and feelings, like I ask everybody to do. Thank you. Someone, Lori said exercise. That's right. Connecting with sisterhoods, working on spirituality. But I'm going to talk about two things that are very, very important. One is mindfulness, making sure that we are paying attention to the here and now, as opposed to focusing on the past, which will have us more depressed, or focusing on the future, which will have us more anxious. And I will never, ever take these words for granted again, that I always ask my clients and patients to do. And I will say to them, just breathe. And after George Floyd was begging and saying, I can't breathe, I want us to take advantage of that opportunity to breathe. We're listening here today, we can breathe. And so you need to take in a nice breath, inhale and count to 4, and then exhale slowly and deeply. You're going to feel much better. And then the other thing is become a part of the solution. You know, sometimes we're sitting on the sidelines and we're feeling bummed out and depressed because we are not able to be a part of the solution. So we want to be a part of the solution. And then we want to exercise and maintain a healthy diet. Very important stuff to help you to get through these times. And the last thing, if you are struggling and you are beyond where you need to be, or you are finding yourself staying in the bed, you are able to move, you're feeling overwhelmed, then seek the help of a trained professional. Turn the news off. Stop preoccupying yourself with the news and social media, and find a way to get help if you need it. And for those of us who are Christian or spiritual, whatever you are, pray and meditate and find yourself connected to your power source. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll come back when it's time for questions and answers.
And Adrian, let's turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. I am so glad to be here tonight in a sister circle where we can do just that. Breathe. Breathe without the interference and noise from other people, other races, anything else interfering with our ability to connect with ourselves. If we look back and kind of assess why this is affecting us so dramatically, there are a couple of things we can look at. First, COVID-19 took away the majority of our social circles, which are the foundations upon which Black women traditionally connect, from our hairdressers, who are probably some of the best psychologists and therapists around, to our churches, where we get that spiritual healing, where we can see and breathe and feel comfortable doing it, to just our sororities, our fellowship circles, our book clubs, everything that we know. Oftentimes when our sisters from another race talk about sororities, and they'll say, oh, I have to do this with my sorority. They'll say, you're still doing that? You guys still do that? And I think to myself, it's not, do you still do that? But it's a part of my life. It's a part of my support. It's a part of my social circle. It's a part of all those things that make us strong. Now, some people like to say that we're all Wonder Women. I prefer to say we're Wakanda women, because Wonder Woman does not take into account the many bags that we carry. Not only are we Black, but we're women in a still very sexist society that doesn't really value it. We're often squeezed between raising children and taking care of elderly parents. We have to deal with the glass ceiling that is rose-colored most of the time. We can look up, but we can't get up there. Not just because we're women, but because we're Black women. And we find ourselves in a position where we go above and beyond to prove that we are worthy of the positions that we have, that the degrees that were given to us were by merit and nothing else, and that we belong in a society that continually expresses microaggressions toward us. Small, innocent, so some say. Others, we see through it and we call it out for what it is. And often we have to deal with the angry Black woman moniker that goes with that. And that weighs on us heavily. My husband used to say, why do you wake up with your fist ball? And I wanted to tell him, because I'm getting ready to fight all of this stuff out there, from a judge asking me, where is your lawyer? And I am the lawyer. To telling my son that he can only drive on certain streets, and knowing, being a teenager, he's going to go where he wants to go, to feeling as though I have to prove every day that I'm worthy of just breathing, where some of my colleagues don't experience that. Now, as Wakanda women, sometimes we need to take the W off. We need to put it down. And COVID-19 was a blessing, but it also had its pitfalls. Let's talk about what was good about it. We had a chance to just stop, to get off of the treadmill that not only do we put ourselves on, but society believes that we should be on. We had a chance to really sit down and assess, what is it that makes me who I am? Because as Black women, we rarely do that. We focus on everything else and don't focus on ourselves. We need to exercise self-care more than anything else. Do you take 5 minutes for yourself? Do you do deep breathing? Have you just sat in one of the chairs that you own in a living room you rarely occupy and just enjoyed your being, just being there? What is it that gives you joy? And COVID-19 has allowed us the opportunity to do just that. If you haven't taken advantage of it, it's still not too late, because now is the time for self-reflection, self-acceptance, and self-love, which we can do. The other thing that is difficult for us as Black women, that is unique to us, is that we tell our children, we sprinkle them with magic fairy dust and Wakanda dust and say, all right, if you keep your hands on the steering wheel, no, better yet, put them outside of the window. If you don't speed, if you are respectful, if you say yes, no, if you are kind, you are gentle, at least you have a chance of coming back home to me, that you are safe. Well, what happened inside of a pandemic that took away our social foundations was America ripping the Band-Aid off of what we already knew. It's one thing to know it, but it's another thing to actually see it. Where a human life, a Black man asking for his mother, was ignored, was completely nullified by anyone, like he was not a person, not a human being. That pulled at everyone's heartstrings, because we could look out and say, that could be my child. As a matter of fact, I don't know if it could be my child, because what I've told him or her traditionally, and what I've been able to convince myself is a good enough shield against the world and all that happens, is no longer there. So how do I protect them in a world where there is nothing else there to keep them from being treated the way they are? So those are some of the things that we're going to talk about, but also, how do we self-heal? How do we get our social circles back? What do we do after this pandemic? And how is it that we feel empowered as women, so that we're not still sad and lonely? And we take these lemons, and using Beyonce's phrase, turn it into lemonade, because we are capable of doing that. So I know we're going to get on to the Q&A, but sit back, relax. I hope you have your favorite beverage, cup of tea, or whatever it is you like, so you can enjoy this sister circle this evening. And I'll turn it back over to Leslie. Thank you.
All right. Adrienne, thank you. Ladies, thank you both. And speaking of making lemonade out of lemons, we're going to make some kind of something out of this bad internet connection. So with that, bear with me, but we do have a couple of questions that have already been submitted by our guests. So let's get this started. And Dr. Morrow, I'd like to address this first question. It comes to us from our guest, Lisa Springer-Hueso, and she asks the following. Dr. David Kessler, co-author with Dr. Kubler-Ross's book on death and dying and on grief and loss, expanded 5 stages of grief to include a 6th stage called finding meaning in the loss of loved ones, in regards to guide individuals through the process of finding meaning through the pandemic and social injustices.
Okay, thank you so much for that rich question. I think that what happens in a situation like we're in right now, as Adrienne said, we have time to stop and reflect. And I think that's what they're talking about. There needs to be some way to make meaning out of what has happened. And so when I think about the situation with George Floyd, I have found myself feeling some sense of joy when I look at the protesters and I see the wide array of ethnicities and racial groups. I see the fact that young people are out there marching, and I'm one of those girls that's, kind of moving up the ladder, and I feel very much hopeful because of that. And I see meaning in the fact that, George Floyd, who otherwise would have probably been insignificant to all of us, but he's this simple guy. There's a song that I love to sing called Ordinary People. And he's one of those ordinary people that has been allowed to do an extraordinary thing. He's not here, but he left something extraordinary because we all witnessed it, and we all will forever remember him for giving his life like that. He didn't give it on purpose, but his life was taken from him, but it brought everybody together. So my idea about meaning is for people to be able to look at the positive aspects of what happens in life and to find the meaning in it. And it's easy when you have a spiritual base, that helps. And sometimes even if you don't have a spiritual base, you need to just sit down and reflect. How does this have meaning for me? And even with COVID-19, I have to share, by me taking this time to pause and to be sequestered in my home, it's been a time of creativity. I have discovered some new things about Gloria that I would not have discovered when I was ripping and running every single day, day and night, doing what I do. And so I have found great meaning even in that, to see beyond it. Now, is it easy for people who may not have the financial resources to be okay during this time? It may be more difficult, but we still have to apply the same opportunities for them to find meaning in whatever happens in life, because it's just life. There's nothing we can do about it. So I think that quest for meaning is very, very important to help us move forward. When I have this understanding of meaning, then I can move on. I can recreate. I can change my direction. I can do some things that I need to do to continue to live or to continue to move on in the midst of a terrible storm that I've been in.
Wonderful answer. Thank you, Dr. Gloria. Our second question, I'll direct to Adrian. Being a Wakanda woman is super difficult in the world. What can we do to let down those barriers and trust each other with our feelings and not be concerned about false motives?
That is a very good question. And one of the things that we need to do during this time of self-reflection is to think about the circles we're in. Do those circles serve us well? Are those circles where we can relax? We can let down our hair. We can be our authentic selves. If not, then we need to re-examine why we're there. What are we getting out of them socially and emotionally that would feed our souls rather than cause us anxiety or feeling like we have to be Wakanda women? One of the reasons I go to the hair salon is because they don't care who I am. I'm just another Black woman in the salon, and I can be my happy, free self no matter what. And if the jokes are flying, that's even better. So we have to think about that. Just because you're in a circle doesn't mean the circle is good for you. And maybe it's time, if this circle is something that you're vested in you having courageous conversations in the circle. I think that this has become an opportunity for everyone to start to dialogue and talk about those things that work and those things that don't. If it's stressful, why is it stressful? And ask the question and take stock of it. And if you still can't get where you need to go, then maybe you should reassess your presence there. There's an old saying, I can love you from afar. I still love you, but I love me too. So I'm gonna keep my distance while still encouraging you to do all that you need to do and grow. So I think that's one of the ways in which we can deal with being a Wakanda woman in Black circles or in our own circle of women. And we have to learn to say no. We as Black women don't say no often enough. If it's something that is overwhelming, if your plate is too full, consider adjusting what you do and how you do it so that you're not always having to be Superwoman, Wakanda woman, and pick up the pieces for everybody. Because if you're not good, if you're not healthy, and if you run yourself down, you're not good for anyone else, particularly your family, particularly your work or anything else. So take stock of your life, assess what it is, breathe about it, think about it, pray about it if you are spiritual and you believe in prayer, and then come back with a real answer for yourself. Not one that has excuses, but one that rips off the band-aids of what you think you are and what you think your contributions should be to yourself. That's my answer.
Okay, great answer, Adrian. Thank you. Dr. Gloria, I'm going to come back to you. You touched on this a little bit. I want to come full circle. It's almost as though you read our minds. we are not just sheltered in our homes, we're isolated from our loved ones, but these are extraordinarily serious issues that we're facing. So I find that people have been sending me questions about the legal issues involved in the Arbery case, certainly in the George Floyd case, closely what's been happening with COVID-19. We're watching the curve flatten. We're watching Governor Cuomo every morning. We're trying to determine for ourselves, when do we think individually it'll be safe to get back out there? And so with taking in all that information, is there such a thing as TMI? Is there such a thing as too much information at a time where it's almost as though we can't know enough? And I want to just sort of underscore that with, let's not forget about November. As we head into this election, we're also really poised to try to stay informed, stay on top of things. I think the prospect for burnout is great. What do you say to that?
Well, thank you. Yes, there is such thing as too much information. Yes, there's TMI. And
Yes.
yes, so I think we have to look for credible sources. I think there are a couple of things that we can do to help us in this season. Number one, we know that there's going to be conflicting information, whether it's national or local. And so I tend to spend more of my time to gather information, looking at CDC information, and also as it relates to the local news that comes out from our governor and, our mayor in Los Angeles, because they have worked hard to put together a comprehensive report. They have a lot of different information, and you can go on their web pages and get information to look at it. So I try my best to not stay inundated on any of the news outlets, because you're going to get a plethora of information
Yeah.
that is too much for you to digest, especially right now. It's kind of like what happened when 9/11 happened. We were sitting at home all day watching those planes keep hitting the building. And that trauma was horrible, not just for the adults, but for the children. And so the same thing happens. We're going to have to remove ourselves and begin to think about our own individual action plans that we can engage in. So whether it's to join up with your organization to do something around social justice, whether it is protesting peacefully, whether it is writing or making masks for COVID-19, doing something that is positive will help you. And I'm going to say that some of y'all need to take that cell phone out and just start deleting some people.
Yes.
Because some of the people that you're talking to are
Yes.
so negative and misinformed. And by the time they finish with you, you're going to be like a dish rag. You're going to need to go lay down, take you some Xanax.
For sure.
Because they're going to definitely inundate you with information that you don't need. So remember, you must stay healthy during this time. And the reason, as I was saying earlier, your immune system is at stake. If you keep bombarding yourself with a lot of negative information, you're going to be more stressed. And the more stressed you are, the more you're going to compromise your immune system, and you won't be able to fight off disease the way we need to. And this thing is not over. I don't care who doesn't wear a mask or who goes out in public in crowds. It is not over. And so you're going to have to come off those social media outlets. Some young lady said that her husband is just getting off of Facebook. There are different things that we can do to keep our sanity. And you must be healthy. And the way to be healthy is to guard your mind. You have to guard what we put into our mind so we can be healthy.
Terrific answer. Thank you, Gloria. And Adrian, do you have anything to add on that point?
Well, I would just add a few more things. Disconnect. Take your cell phone out of your hand, turn it off. Don't sleep with it. Don't answer it. The media is there to sensationalize to an extent. So the more that we put in or allow to come in, the less we hear ourselves and the less we can focus on those things which are really important to us. and really matter. Every day there's going to be a different story, a different controversy, and that's just like constantly being hit over the head with something. Pretty soon it's going to affect you. And we're approaching an election, which is highly contentious. We see all of the things that are going on with that election, so that makes us anxious. We are bombarded with nonsensical tweets. That is more of an issue. So everywhere you look, there is something in social media, something in the media that tends to take us off balance. If you want to restore your equilibrium, stay away from it. Read. Reading can be therapeutic, and then you can choose how you want it to affect you versus having someone sensationalize it. One channel, CNN, they constantly have breaking news. It's not really breaking. You saw it an hour ago, but it's a part of the sensationalization of the senses that they hope will draw you there. So we have to back away from it. Back away from Facebook. It can be just as negative sometimes, but be mindful of the fact that we still need Facebook and other platforms in order to maintain our circles. We have found that this is the only way in which we can have sister circles. We can maintain and stay in touch with our families, and we need it to do that because we still need to have a sense of connection. And being in this where we're under stay-at-home orders, what it's really like is being incarcerated at home. And I think all of us can imagine now what that feels like, not to have physical touch, physical interaction, because as human beings, we read each other. We read physical clues. And those are the things that help us maintain our equilibrium and help us to filter out good information from bad information. And just because your friends say it doesn't necessarily mean you have to hear it. So that's all I would say about that.
Okay, Adrienne, I'm going to stick with you for this next question. All right. One of the biggest displays, in fact, before the George Floyd tragedy, one of the other protests we saw during the pandemic was from congregants and parishioners eager to return to their regular church-going activities and other places of worship. COVID-19 was very disruptive to all of our routines. But can you talk about the importance of routine and rituals and how to replace what we've lost to keep, again, to use your word, to keep our equilibrium?
I think we touched on this a little bit before, but as Black women, our lives are run by routine. Everyone has a routine. It makes us feel comfortable. It validates who we are and what we do. And it keeps out all of those things that tend to make us uncomfortable. What we can do to maintain or restore is first go through a self-assessment. Which of those social circles or which of those routines serve you well, or which of those don't serve you well anymore and don't have a purpose in your life? So a little house cleaning or soul cleaning as it is. The other thing is to replace our sense of equilibrium. We need to find a balance within ourselves first, and secondly, within the groups that we have, and be active and proactive in reaching out to other people and connecting with them. Being on a social media platform or a Zoom platform poses its own unique challenges because we can't be with people and it takes a little more effort. You would think that it doesn't because we don't have to drive, you can stay at home, but it actually takes more time and effort to connect and have a genuine connection over these platforms. So you have to be intentional about doing it. The next thing is find out what your place is in all of these conversations. If you feel you need to protest, figure out a way to do that. If you feel you want to focus on COVID-19, do that. But I think one of the things that is harmful is if you try to focus on too much. Find your own unique spot to maintain your balance. The next thing would be COVID-19 is going to be here. Racism is going to be here. And there are so many other issues that still remain that are prevalent that are just aren't in the headlines right now. Homelessness, the mortality rate of Black children, the education system, the medical system, the disparities that we have. All of those things are in need of attention. So just because you are not focusing on either the George Floyd and the racist issues there, or focused on COVID-19, you can still have your place. And the last thing is, find out what brings you joy. I can say during this pandemic, I love my art, but I wasn't able to do it because I had so many things on my plate, so many places to be and go that I never focused on it. It's giving me a chance to reconnect with it and to also think of new art forms. So that you have to have a release no matter what it is. And if you can't figure out what your art form is, think about journaling. Journaling is a really important tool to speak to yourself, basically, about what's going on. And you can always go back and revisit where you were and see what your progress has been and what trajectory you're on and what's working and what's not, and have a living history to refer to.
Okay, very good. Dr. Gloria, anything to add in that respect?
Yeah, just a couple of things, because this has been a big discussion. I'm unapologetically a Christian who was at church every Sunday. And so one of the things that has been really interesting is to hear some of the rhetoric say that we're going to open church back up. Well, my church never closed because I am the church and we are the church. And so I still maintain those rituals at home. I still have my praise and worship. I still read the Bible. I still pray. You know, I still sing. I'll go sit at my piano and just play and sing. I still worship God. I still include God in my life. And so I just want to encourage everyone to start thinking of the church or faith differently, that we have a structure that we enjoy. And I'll be glad to get back and see my sisters and brothers. I'll be happy to fellowship with them. But I have enjoyed online church. I have gone to some churches that I couldn't go to before, all over the country. I did in my pajamas too. That's the best part. So I think, again, we have to see the glass either half full or half empty. And I have begun to see the glass half full. This has been such a wonderful time for every area of my life. I have finished 2 ebooks, just finished my first screenplay. I have been spending time with my son and daughter and grandchildren. I would not have this kind of time had I been out there doing what I always do. So I want you to know that God is inside of us. And so when I hear people say that we're going to reopen the church like the church has been closed, my church has just not been closed. And I dare to say that your church has not been closed either. Maybe you couldn't go and be there for the fellowship, but you can always connect online. You can connect with different groups. They have a lot of spiritual groups at our churches, and they still have Bible studies and still have a lot of opportunities for information. So take advantage of some of those things until we can go back in the building. It's just a building. And in fact, I have found that the building is great, but nothing has been greater than the amount of time of prayer and meditation and worship that I've been able to do in my backyard, that I've been able to do in my home. Nothing has been like that. And when I was running and ripping all the time, I cannot honestly say that I would have had that same experience. So for those of you who are struggling, please know that you are the church. Find a way to keep those symbols alive in your heart. And then when you get back, you'll be so happy to see everybody, and it'll be great.
Wonderful answer. Go ahead, Adrienne.
And I just want to say, COVID stopped stuff, but you didn't stop living. You're still living. You're still here. You still have all of the things that made you you, that you can further explore and expound upon. So if you're suffering from depression, if you're suffering from sadness or loss, don't think of it in those terms, but think about what you've gained as a result of having this time to yourself. Flip the script. You have the perfect right to do it. And now is a good time.
Perfect. Great advice. Great advice. Let's see. Gloria, I'm going to come back to you. As we, again, focus on where a lot of the attention is right now, it seems like we are poised on the brink of seeing perhaps real significant change in terms of criminal justice reform, addressing inequality, and becoming just more articulate about it. But it's probably fair to say that this is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. What do you say to people as you've talked about being active and finding ways to get active and participate? But what do you recommend in terms of pacing ourselves?
Well, remember that we have been here for many decades. This has been our history and our current experience for so long. To think that it's going to quickly change, that's not possible. But I will tell you, if you celebrate every change you see, like for example, I saw something happen yesterday with the police chief in LA, with them pulling up an old tape and showing some possible police brutality, and that they made a decision right then. The mayor in Florida, or the police chief in Florida, did something right on the spot, taking down the Confederate flag for, the car races. Little things like that are showing that there is some change like we've never seen before, because we've been here before. We've protested before. We've had Rodney King. We've had all these different, the Watts riots. We've had all that stuff happen, but we have never quite seen change like we have now. And let me tell you why. Because if you looked at that crowd, we had so many white people as part of this agenda. And let me just tell you this, until white people become as angry as we are about this,
Yes,
we don't really see the kind of change like we're seeing now. So I
yes.
think we now have some allies that are helping us to not change this narrative that we have been oppressed. And so I'm just so grateful for that. So again, pace yourself, be hopeful for everything. And I want to say this has to do with just your whole life. I have written a gratitude list, things I'm grateful for, no matter what's going on. I've had some things that happen in my life that have been hard, and I have found a way to be grateful even in those dark times. So if you would just make a grateful list every time something is done that's moving us in the right direction, then I think you'll start feeling hopeful and joyful when these things happen. Be patient. It's not going to happen overnight. And some of the systemic racism that needs to be addressed, we're going to have to spend even more time. But what I'm seeing is the individuals making the change, that people are confronting one another and saying, that's racist when you say that, and really standing up like never before. And that is so hopeful for me, because when we say it, we're just angry Black women. But when other communities say it, then they listen to it. So again, we are seeing something like we've never seen before, but let's pace ourselves. Let's be hopeful. Let's go to the polls. Let's make sure everybody we know goes to the polls to change what we can experience in the future.
Okay, great, great. Now, turning to you, Adrian, one of the unintended benefits of being confined to our homes during this period of tremendous grief is that we've been shielded to a degree from interacting closely with our non-Black friends and colleagues. Give us some ideas on how to handle those conversations and interactions that will occur when we return back to our regular schedules and back to work full time.
I think one of the first things you have to do is decide if you want to have the conversations.
Right.
If it's a personal decision, if it's comfortable for you, then I would suggest brutal honesty in those conversations with tact. Now, some of them will approach you and really want to understand and want an explanation. Others will want to continue to feed you an excuse as to why they don't believe that this is really the case, and challenge what our truth and reality is. Well, reality is relative as well as truth. So you can't tell me what my truth is. I can only tell you what I think based upon what happens. The other thing is that we have to be certain to not mince words if they want to hear the conversation and the explanation and create a safe space for us to do it. We have to be assured of our facts and how we want to interact. If it's a close friend, you might have a different conversation. It might be a good time for you to say, when you did X and Y, that didn't feel good to me, or it didn't land well with me. There's nothing that says we have to be confrontational, because we certainly don't want the message to be lost because of the way the message is being given. But we do want a degree of understanding. The next thing that I think you should do is talk to whoever your HR person is and ask them if they're going to have equity classes, if they're going to have training on racism and equality within particular companies. And that will let you know the degree of their commitment to eradicate it. And if there's an open forum, if they don't have it, maybe it's time for you to suggest it, to chair it, or to be a part of those conversations. You definitely need to. I'm torn on the question of whether or not we need to ask for an apology or how we would take an apology. I don't necessarily believe that an apology is a solution to what is happening, but I do think awareness is. And as Dr. Gloria said, it is so heartening to see other people join us in this fight, in this cause, because they now see to some extent what we see. But you know, you still have those friends that want to come to you, or those colleagues who want to come to you now as the authority on all things Black. I can tell you just personally, I'm in a room full of all white men most of the time. And now when they want to send out a message about race, they want me to read it, refine it, and make sure it's okay with me. Well, I'm not the author on what is okay for all Black people. I can just tell you how it lands for me. And for you to make that assumption to me, hence it being a little biased. So I choose not to engage in it, but to talk about it in a different way. The other thing is our blind acceptance of quote unquote jokes. I have a friend who took a picture of a Black woman, homeless, who was dancing for him, and he paid her to do it. Then he sent me the video and asked, was this okay? And my immediate reaction was, why would it be okay? Would it be okay in any other scenario? If it hadn't been a Black person, would it have been okay? And the fact that you paid her does not absolve you from the fact that you have caused this woman to dance on a video for money and humiliate herself. So think about all the subconscious ways that racism and bias comes up, and think about addressing them. But
Okay.
again, it's your personal, again, it is your personal choice how you choose to address them and the conversations you have. Because they're going to happen. It's just how you choose to address them.
Okay. Gloria, I'm going to stick with that same question and turn to you. And what I'd like you, if you could also think about, is what a lot of us saw, and I'll even pose to our audience to think about. A lot of us saw or were met with silence, a deafening silence. So it wasn't just our white friends or non-Black friends coming to us with questions. Some of us got a spattering of those, but I think what really resonated with a lot of us was the silence coming from our non-Black friends. It sort of adds to the discomfort that we feel that you talked about earlier. It's anxiety inducing when you don't know what people are thinking. And that's even in light of extending a tremendous amount of grace to our loved ones who happen to not be Black. I think all of us can appreciate that people who have never experienced racism firsthand don't always have the tools and the vocabulary and the emotional encyclopedia to have those discussions. And so that's what inhibits a lot of those conversations. But the outright silence makes you wonder. And so again, as we return to normal, return to our normal social activities, return to work, how do we address that, Dr. Gloria?
Well, as a part of my work is I do cultural competency training. So uh, there are two concepts that I have been sharing with people who have been brave enough to want to talk to me. And those two concepts are white privilege and white guilt. And so when you have the opportunity, to try to help people to understand those two concepts, I think it can be helpful to have that conversation because they really don't get it. Because a lot of white people associate privilege with having money and having, power to have that money. But as we know, you can be a poor white person and be treated better than a rich black person.
Mhm.
So I think that if you're able and you are able to do that and be respectful and kind, I still believe Dr. King had something. Sometimes we criticize the nonviolent approach, but I believe that what he was trying to see happen for our world was that we should be able to come together because of love. He believed in the beloved community. So he believed that everybody was a part of the beloved community. And his daughter is a very good friend of mine. And we have these discussions all the time. So when are we going to, stop having to be the teacher and teach people how to be good citizens? And so I think we are still going to have to be available and to have the right environment. So if they do come, we have an opportunity to share our truth, but you must share your truth. It's very important. I don't mind talking about when I had to be concerned about going in the store and someone follow me. I've been called the person that works in the store. I've had all those experiences. I've had a child who drove home and the police is right behind him, pulls him out, puts a gun to his head just because he said he rolled through a stop sign. And all I could do was go outside and say, Stephen, don't move. Do not move. Don't say one word until the situation got better where he had that gun off his face. And then I asked that officer, what in the world would make you do such a thing? But I've had those experiences, so I tell my testimony. That's what I do. I don't try to teach them in the traditional way. I just share my experiences, and my experiences are real to me, and that can help people. So I think you should be able to do that. And if, as Adrian says, if you don't feel like sharing today, you can just be honest and say, you know what? I just don't really feel like talking about this today. It's not a good day, especially if you know it's not a good day for you. It's not the right day to have that conversation. And then, then the other thing is go to your workplaces and see if they're planning to have something. In fact, I had to speak for the California Funding Foundation last week to help them to kind of process, because you need to have a time of group process sometimes so you can have those conversations. But you don't have to be the authority for all black people. You certainly don't have to be the educator for all black people.
Right.
If you feel like you want to engage, you feel like these people are really genuine and they want to do that, then do it. Now the silence is because they're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I tell people all the time,
Very much so.
when I do my trainings, I tell people it's okay to be uncomfortable. But if somebody becomes too uncomfortable, they shut down. So what is happening now? People don't know how we're going to receive. There's a lot of white guilt going on. People are feeling horrible about, what they've seen. And now they are thinking about how they thought too. They're thinking about how they've said, well, she's just being, pulling the race card, or she's just overreacting. So
Right.
they've got this guilt going on. So I want you to know that you don't have to be the expert in making them feel relieved because of their guilt. but as another human.
Where's the William?
Make sure I take that time to spend time with people who I believe are genuine and they want to talk. So
Dr. Gloria, I think we might have lost some of your audio. Can you repeat that last sentence for
yeah,
us?
I was just saying that, you know, the avoidance has to do with people being uncomfortable. And a little discomfort is good.
Right.
You need to have some discomfort, you know, when you're having courageous conversations, because that's what will make change happen. But if it's too uncomfortable, so if you're talking to somebody and you're just really letting them have it, that person's going to shut down. And if they see you as the person that will let people have it, they are going to avoid. They're not going to want to talk. So you have to create an environment. Yeah, you have to create an environment just as a person who's a loving person. You just have to create an environment. It still allows you to tell your truth. They tease me all the time. They say, how do you do it? How do you do those trainings? And, you know, the person walks away and say, I think she called me a racist. But it's with so much love and care until they don't know what hit them. So we have to be able to deliver our message, our truth, and do it in such a way because you really want them to get it.
To hear you.
But if they don't, hey, it's okay. It's not my job to convince you. I'm just sharing my testimony, let you know how this has affected me in my life. And then you can do with that as you wish.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Great response. Great response. Well, ladies, we're going to ask if any of our guests, any of our viewers have any final questions they'd like to submit. And if not, this will bring us to a close. We certainly want to thank both Dr. Morrow and Attorney Macklin for taking the time with us this evening. This has been extraordinary. We could have gone for another hour and a half and still not touched on every single issue that's been presented to us in the last 90 days. Thank you for providing us with some tools and some skills and some great advice. With that, we want to thank every one of you for choosing to spend some time with this evening. Thank you for your questions. We truly appreciate it. And we want to remind you, there are resources available. We'll post those up, but we have a number of resources that you can utilize during this pandemic season. And also, as we continue to deal with the protests and upcoming legal processes in so many of these cases that will be pending. So if you look through this list, these list of resources will be available, but we ask that you all take advantage and also share them. Also, we want to make sure that we mention Dr. Gloria's upcoming book. It is available online at her website. We are so proud of her and can't wait to get our own copy. Unleash the secret weapons to your success. 7 strategies for activation. And she's indicated to us that it will be available online on her website after this Friday, the 12th, June 12th. So everyone, please make sure to get a copy. And then finally, we want to remind all of you to please take our pop-up survey that you all will see at the end of this evening's webinar. We look forward to your input. We definitely take all of your comments to heart, and hopefully we'll be able to continue this series and continue to meet with all of you and fellowship with all of you while we're all stuck at home. Again, have a great evening. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our COVID webinar chair, Link Natalie Nathal.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Thank you to the panelists. You all were absolutely amazing. I'm so happy to hear from all of you tonight, and I'm sure our audience does as well. You know, as was mentioned earlier, this is the finale of this Coping in Quarantine series. You know, faced with the unique paradox of how to continue serving our community while physically distancing is how this series was born. We inherently understand that service to our community is even more important during a crisis than ever before. And as we navigate life during this global pandemic, as well as racial pandemic, this webinar series was designed to educate, especially our most vulnerable populations, in proactively working to combat and mitigate the impact of COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting economic ramifications, with topics that range from mental health, navigating employment concerns, and finances. So with that, I wanted to take the time to thank those that made this series the success that it has been. This series would not have been possible if it wasn't for these amazing members of the Harbor Area Chapter's Emergency Response Committee, who have been incredibly instrumental in bringing this series to fruition. I thank you for lending your talents and skills and being agile enough to quickly respond to our community's needs, as was demonstrated by our need to pivot for our last webinar tonight in responding to recent events. I would also like to thank our amazing technology committee under the leadership of Ms. Nicole Bell Mitchell, as well as Dr. Gail Ball Parker. And I definitely want to give a special heartfelt thanks and gratitude to the president of the Harbor Area Chapter, Dr. Valerie Green Amos, for your leadership, your support, as well as your participation in this series, not once, but twice. So thank you so much. Lastly, we want to thank you, our listeners, for joining us for the first time tonight, or just or you've been a loyal participant throughout this entire series. We thank you, and we hope that you have found this series both engaging and informative. God bless, stay safe, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.